Vanessa added it with that fake smile I already knew so well, probably for the rest of my life. Everyone laughed as if it were the wittiest joke in the world. I laughed too, pretending that every single word didn't sting. Michael smiled, proud of his elegant wife, while Charles and Catherine exchanged looks of superiority from their imported leather armchairs. The next morning, my phone rang. "Mom, please, don't do this. Where are you all watching from today? Leave your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel." My name is Mary Hope Davis, and at 65 years old, I thought I had already lived through all the humiliations that life had to offer. I was wrong. That night at the Montgomery's house, dressed in my best navy blue suit, the same one I had worn to my Robert's funeral 3 years ago, I sat on the gold velvet sofa while Vanessa served appetizers on porcelain china that cost more than 2 months of my weighted pension. "So, Mary," Charles Montgomery said, adjusting his designer glasses, "Michael tells us you're looking for work." His tone was the exact same one he would use to ask a child about their report card. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to explain that I was just exploring options to stay active. Michael avoided my gaze and focused entirely on his glass of wine. "Well," I replied carefully, "after retiring from the school district, I've been considering some part-time opportunities. Nothing too." "How admirable," Catherine interrupted, flashing that condescending smile she had perfected over decades at the country club. "At your age, most people settle for watching daytime soap operas and babysitting grandkids." Vanessa, sitting next to Michael like a queen on her throne, cleared her throat delicately. "The truth is, Mama Mary needs to stay busy. She doesn't have many social options." The comment hung in the air like toxic smoke. Translation: she is a lonely widow who has no life of her own. "Of course," Charles continued, "we understand the situation. Losing Robert was a significant hit to the family finances, I imagine." There it was, the subtle reminder that I was now officially the poor relative of the family. Michael finally spoke up. "Dad's right. Mom is just between jobs right now." His voice sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced that exact phrase. Vanessa added it with that fake smile, "probably for the rest of my life." The laughter that followed sounded like breaking glass. Charles settled back into his armchair with the deep satisfaction of someone who had just witnessed an entertaining show. Catherine nodded in approval at her perfect daughter-in-law. Michael smiled as if his wife had just said something utterly charming. And I laughed too, because I knew something they didn't. Something I had discovered that very morning when the estate attorney in Dallas had finished reading the will of my Aunt Margaret Hope, my father's rebellious sister, who had made a fortune in commercial real estate and lived her final years as an eccentric recluse. My laugh was genuine because I had just inherited $42 million. But that night, pretending to be the pathetic widow they all believed me to be, I made a mental note of every cruel smile, every derogatory comment, every second of humiliation. Especially when Charles raised his glass and said, "Well, at least Vanessa married into a hard-working family. That's quaint." Quaint. That word. As if we were some tourist postcard of poverty. They didn't know that 3 days prior, I had received a call that would change everything. They didn't know that Montgomery Industries, the family corporation that bankrolled their ostentatious lifestyle, was secretly up for sale due to deep financial troubles they had managed to hide from the public. And they definitely didn't know that the very next morning, my lawyer would begin the acquisition process. When I said my goodbyes that night, I hugged Vanessa with apparent maternal affection. "Thank you for the lovely evening, sweetheart." "Of course, Mama Mary," she replied with venomous sweetness. "It's always interesting having you here." I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my Honda Accord, my mind already working through the details of what was to come. In the rearview mirror, the Montgomery mansion glowed like a beacon of arrogance, but something told me those lights would soon go out. 3 years ago, when Robert died of a massive heart attack while pruning the rose bushes in our backyard, I thought my world had ended. 40 years of marriage vanished in the back of an ambulance that arrived too late. Michael and Vanessa had been married for barely 6 months at the time. Vanessa showed up to the funeral, wearing a black designer dress that cost more than the casket. She cried the appropriate tears, and shortly after, she appointed herself my new guide to family etiquette. "Mama Mary," she had told me a week after the funeral, while organizing Robert's paperwork with military efficiency, "Michael and I have been talking about your situation. My situation. As if widowhood were a contagious disease. "We think it would be best if you sold this big house. It's too much space for one person, and the upkeep must be terribly expensive." Vanessa had developed this special talent for making her orders sound like loving advice. Michael, sitting on the very sofa that Robert had reupholstered with his own hands, nodded along like a well-trained dog. "It's for your own good, Mom," he added. "We could help you find something more appropriate." Appropriate. Another key word in the Montgomery vocabulary. It meant cheaper, smaller, further away from them. But I didn't sell the house. On the contrary, I renovated it using my teacher's savings. I turned Robert's old study into a beautiful library and, for the first time in decades, I started living strictly by my own rules. Vanessa never forgave me for that disobedience. The family visits became less frequent, more formal. I was no longer the Grandma Mary who baked her famous Thanksgiving pecan pies. Now, I was a social obligation, a burden they had to endure for the sake of appearances. The transformation was gradual but systematic. First, Sunday family dinners were moved to the Montgomery mansion because they had more space for entertaining. Then, my opinion on family matters stopped mattering because Vanessa just understands modern trends better. Finally, I became exactly what I was that night, an object of condescending pity. But Vanessa had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated a woman who had taught public high school mathematics for 30 years. I knew how to recognize patterns, calculate probabilities, and, most importantly, I knew when someone was trying to cheat me. The Montgomerys thought they held all the cards. Charles, with his political connections and his corporate empire. Catherine, with her web of social influence that could destroy reputations with a single whisper at the country club. Vanessa, with her calculated beauty and her absolute ability to manipulate my son. What they didn't know was that Aunt Margaret had been far more astute than anyone gave her credit for. For years, while my family dismissed her as the crazy aunt who lived surrounded by rescue cats, Margaret had been quietly building a real estate and investment empire that spanned 3 states and included stakes in several major corporations, including Montgomery Industries. When the attorney read the letter Margaret had left alongside her will, her words felt like a gift from destiny itself. "Dear Mary, if you are hearing this, it means I have finally died, and you are the only family member worth a damn in this generation of mediocres. Use this money to do what I never could. Show the world that women like us are not the victims of the story. We are the authors." That very afternoon, following the humiliation at the Montgomerys' house, I sat at the kitchen table where Robert and I had drank our coffee every morning for 4 decades, and I dialed the number of the most expensive corporate lawyer in the city. "Mr. Sterling," I said when he answered. "My name is Mary Davis, and I need to buy a company with absolute discretion." His chuckle was patronizing until I mentioned the exact amount of cash I was prepared to wire. "Montgomery Industries, you say?" Arthur Sterling's tone shifted instantly. "An interesting choice, Mrs. Davis. Very interesting." Sterling's office was on the 20th floor of a glass high-rise that reflected the clouds like a giant mirror. When I arrived that morning, dressed in my beige linen suit and my sensible retired teacher shoes, the receptionist looked at me as if I had wandered into the wrong building. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, with a smile that completely bypassed her eyes. "Mary Davis." "Mr. Sterling is expecting me." 2 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man who had built his entire career tearing apart warring family corporations. Arthur Sterling was 60 years old, had perfectly coiffed silver hair, and possessed a shark-like reputation whispered about in the city's elite business circles. "Mrs. Davis," he said, reviewing the documents I had brought, "I must admit, your proposal intrigues me. I rarely see wire transfers of this magnitude coming from personal accounts." I had spent the entire previous night organizing Aunt Margaret's estate. $42 million was spread across 3 different banks, plus 5 commercial properties generating considerable monthly income. "My aunt was a very forward-thinking woman," I replied simply. Sterling smiled with genuine respect. "I see that now." "Regarding Montgomery Industries, may I ask your specific interest in this firm?" I leaned back in the Italian leather chair and decided to give him only part of the truth. "Let's just say I have personal reasons to ensure the company passes into more competent hands." "I understand perfectly." His eyes gleamed with the quiet comprehension of someone who had facilitated his fair share of family vendettas. "The company is officially valued at $35 million, but my inside sources indicate they are willing to accept $25 million for a quick, quiet sale. $25 million. Just a fraction of what I had inherited. What are their exact financial problems? I asked. Sterling opened a thick manila folder. Failed commercial real estate investments in Aspen, a massive bank loan that matures in 6 months. And the most interesting part, a silent partner who is aggressively pushing for immediate liquidity. A silent partner, someone named Margaret Hope. My heart skipped a beat. Aunt Margaret had been partners with the Montgomerys without my knowledge. And now, technically, I was that silent partner pushing for liquidity. It seems destiny has a sense of humor, I murmured. Excuse me? Nothing. What do you need to proceed? 1 week for the standard due diligence. We want to ensure there are no legal surprises. After that, we can structure the buyout through a shell corporation to maintain your anonymity. A shell corporation. A legal entity that will shield you. The Montgomerys will never know who the buyer is until you decide to reveal yourself. Perfect. That would give me time to plan my reveal. Is there anything else? Sterling asked, flipping through a few more pages. Montgomery Industries holds several lucrative government contracts. As the new owner, you would have considerable leverage over certain personnel decisions. Translation: I could fire whoever I wanted without explanation, including the executive staff. Especially the executive staff. I walked out of that office feeling something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. True power, not the domestic power of deciding what to cook for dinner or what show to watch on television. Real power. The kind that could alter lives and rewrite destinies. In the parking garage, as I fished for my keys, my phone rang. Michael. Hi, honey, I answered, using my warmest maternal voice. Mom, where are you? Vanessa wanted to invite you to lunch today. Vanessa wanted to invite me to lunch, most likely to offer a backhanded apology for last night's humiliation, or, more accurately, to make sure I hadn't taken her remarks too seriously. How thoughtful of her, I said, but I have some business to attend to. Business? Mom, don't tell me you're still thinking about looking for a job. We already talked about this. You're right, Michael. I'm no longer thinking about looking for a job. Oh, good. Vanessa will be so relieved. I'm thinking about creating one. The silence on the other end of the line was delicious. Creating a job? Mom, what are you talking about? You'll find out soon enough, sweetheart. Give Vanessa my best. I hung up before he could respond and got into my Honda Accord with a smile I hadn't felt on my face in years. 1 week. In 1 week, I would be the sole owner of Montgomery Industries. Vanessa called me herself that very afternoon while I was brewing coffee in my kitchen. Her voice dripped with that artificial sweetness she always used when she needed something. Mama Mary, Michael tells me you've been busy today. A calculated pause. I hope you aren't upset about anything I said last night. Upset was far too small a word for what I felt, but it wasn't the time to show my hand. Upset? Why on earth would I be upset, sweetheart? Well, sometimes my sense of humor can be a little direct. I didn't mean to offend you. Direct. Like calling a punch to the face, direct physical contact. Vanessa, you are perfect exactly as you are. And it was true. Her calculated perfection was going to be her absolute downfall. Oh, you're so sweet. Listen, I wanted to invite you to dinner on Friday. My parents are so eager to get to know you better, spend more time with the Montgomerys. Normally, I would have invented an excuse to decline. But now, I had every reason to accept any opportunity to observe my future property in its natural habitat. I would love to. Excellent. And Mama Mary, could you make that famous peach cobbler of yours? Daddy just loves homemade desserts. Of course. The poor widow would bring the quaint homemade dessert while they served imported wine. With pleasure. After hanging up, I sat down to map out the next few days. Sterling had been perfectly clear. We needed to move fast, but quietly. The Montgomerys couldn't suspect a thing until it was far too late. On Wednesday, I received the first call from Sterling with excellent news. Mrs. Davis, I have privileged information. Montgomery Industries is much more desperate than we initially thought. Charles Montgomery met with 3 different commercial banks yesterday. Every single one denied his requests for credit extensions. What does that mean for us? It means they have exactly 4 months before they file for bankruptcy, and it means they will accept our offer of $19 million if we put it on the table this week. $19 million. Down from the $25 million I had budgeted. Is there any risk they might find another buyer? I've made a few discreet calls. Let's just say, temporarily, there are no other serious buyers in the market. Sterling had his methods, and I preferred not to ask for the details. On Thursday morning, while I was out watering Robert's rose bushes, I watched Vanessa step out of her white BMW in my driveway. She was wearing a white summer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. "Mama Mary, are you home?" I walked up to the porch, wiping my hands on my apron. "Good morning, Vanessa. What a pleasant surprise. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to confirm the details for tomorrow." She approached with that radiant smile that had so easily conquered my son. "How is that cobbler coming along?" "Already in the fridge." "So efficient. Listen, I also wanted to personally apologize for any misunderstandings on Monday." There it was, the preemptive strike. "Vanessa, there's absolutely nothing to apologize for. I understand my position in this family perfectly." Something flickered in her eyes. I had sounded a little too calm. "Your position is so important to us," she said quickly. "You are the matriarch of the family. The grandmother to our future children." Future children? Interesting. They were already banking on the next generation. "What a beautiful family project," I replied with genuine sincerity. Because it was beautiful. It would be even more beautiful when those grandchildren grew up knowing a grandmother who was a millionaire CEO, not a pitiful widow depending on family charity. "Yes, well." Vanessa looked unsettled by my lack of emotional resistance. "The thing is, tomorrow night, my father is having some very important guests over. Business partners, you know? And, well, maybe it would be best if you didn't mention your job hunt. It might give the wrong impression about the family's financial stability." And there was the real reason for her morning visit. They wanted to make sure the poor relative didn't embarrass the family in front of the business partners. "Of course, sweetheart. I won't breathe a word about looking for work." Her relief was palpable. "Perfect. It's going to be a beautiful evening." The second she drove away, I dialed Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to accelerate the process. Is it possible to close the acquisition before Friday night? Is there a particular urgency? Let's just say I have a very important family dinner, and I'd love to arrive with good news." His laugh was genuinely delighted. "Mrs. Davis, I think I like you very much. Let me make a few calls." On Friday morning, just as I was pulling the peach cobbler out of the refrigerator, my phone rang. "Sterling, Mrs. Davis, extraordinary news. Montgomery Industries just accepted our offer of $19 million. 19? I thought we agreed to push for 20. Their situation deteriorated overnight. Apparently, one of their major government contracts has just been placed under federal investigation for irregularities. They need liquid cash immediately. $19 million for a company valued at $35 million was almost laughable. "When can we sign?" "The paperwork is ready. If you can come into the office this afternoon, we can close before 6 p.m. That fast? When a corporation is staring down the barrel of collapse, the red tape vanishes remarkably quickly. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table, the exact spot where Robert and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 40 years. In a few short hours, I would own a $3-5 million corporation. The exact corporation that employed my son as director of development, and that had bankrolled the Montgomery family's lavish lifestyle for decades. The sheer power I was about to acquire was intoxicating. At 2 p.m., I was back in Sterling's office, this time accompanied by my personal CPA, a discreet man who had managed my modest finances since Robert's passing. "The documents are flawless," he confirmed after reviewing every single page. "The wire transfer will be executed through Hope Investments LLC, the entity we established under your name. Hope Investments, a tribute to Aunt Margaret, and my own middle name. Aunt Margaret would have been so damn proud." "When will the Montgomerys find out who the actual buyer is?" I asked. "That depends entirely on you," Sterling replied. "Legally, they can operate for months without knowing the identity of the new owner. Or, you can reveal yourself immediately. And the current staff? As the new sole proprietor, you have absolute unilateral authority over all personnel decisions. You can retain or terminate anyone you see fit." I signed the legal documents with the exact same calm demeanor I had used to grade high school math tests for 30 years. The only difference was that this time, the numbers meant real, unbridled power. At exactly 5:30 p.m., Mary Hope Davis officially became the owner of Montgomery Industries. By 6 p.m., I was back home getting ready for the family dinner, carefully stepping into my navy blue suit, the same one I had worn during my first humiliation, and clasping my cultured pearls around my neck. Robert's anniversary gift. At 7 p.m., my phone rang. Michael. Mom, are you ready? I'll be there to pick you up in 15 minutes. I'll be waiting right here, honey. And Mom. Thanks for not making a scene about the other night. Vanessa was really worried. Don't you worry about a thing, Michael. Tonight is going to be very, very quiet. When I hung up, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror Robert had installed in our bedroom for our 20th anniversary. The woman staring back at me looked exactly the same as she always did. A 6'5" widow with silvering hair pulled into a sensible bun, wrinkles that told the story of decades of smiles and worries, and brown eyes that had watched a son be born and grow into a man. Eyes that had wept over a husband's grave and endured 3 years of suffocating family condescension. But there was something entirely different in those eyes tonight, a spark that hadn't been there that morning. In 1 hour, I would sit at the Montgomerys' dining table as the poor relative who needed to be tolerated. I would eat off their expensive china. I would listen to their boastful conversations about businesses they no longer owned. I would smile while they treated me like an entertaining family pet. And they wouldn't have the slightest clue that they were having dinner with their new boss. The peach cobbler was perfectly chilled in its glass dish. I covered it carefully with aluminum foil and placed it in my trusty Pyrex carrier. After all, I had promised to bring dessert. The Montgomery mansion glowed like a luxury cruise ship against the night sky, every window blazing with light, a valet waiting by the circular driveway. Michael helped me out of the car while a uniformed attendant took my modest Tupperware container. Remember, Mom, Michael whispered as we walked up the grand steps to the front doors. There are some very important people here tonight. Just try to blend in quietly. Blend in quietly. Family code 4. Keep your mouth shut and don't embarrass anyone. Vanessa appeared in the grand foyer like a vision in gold silk, her arms outstretched in a theatrical welcome. Mama Mary, you look beautiful tonight. She hugged me with the calculated warmth of an A-list actress. Her perfume was expensive and suffocating. Thank you, sweetheart. The house looks spectacular. Daddy hired special decorators just for tonight. Come, I want to introduce you to some of the guests. She guided me through the marble entry into the main living room, where a dozen elegant people stood around sipping champagne. I recognized a few faces from the local society pages, wealthy regional developers, a couple of minor state politicians, and several wives dripping in jewelry that cost more than my house. Everyone, Vanessa announced in her sweetest bell-like voice, I want you to meet Michael's mother. The polite conversations paused as I was introduced strictly as Vanessa's mother-in-law and the director of development's mother. Nobody asked for my last name or my former profession. I was simply a family accessory. Charles appeared, holding a glass of Cabernet in one hand and a thick cigar in the other, looking every inch the corporate patriarch he believed himself to be. Mary, my dear, so good to see you again. I hope you're enjoying the evening. Very much, Charles. Your home is truly impressive. Well, when a man works hard his entire life, he earns the right to certain luxuries. His smile was sickeningly patronizing. Of course, we don't all have the same fortune when it comes to business. The words hung in the air like cigar smoke. A few guests smiled with polite discomfort. You're absolutely right, I replied smoothly. We definitely do not all have the same fortune. Charles entirely missed the irony of my words. He just nodded, as if I had merely confirmed his natural superiority over me. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that looked like a set from a period drama. Crystal chandeliers, heirloom silver, and table linens that probably had more historical value than my entire estate. They seated me exactly where I expected to be, at the far end of the table, sandwiched between the family accountant's wife and an older man who introduced himself as the Montgomery's wealth advisor. During the first course, I quietly listened to loud conversations about stock portfolios, beachfront properties in Malibu, and summer trips to Europe. Everything was spoken with the casual, breezy air of people who never once had to check their bank account balance before swiping a card. By the way, Charles boomed, addressing the entire table. "I have some very exciting news to share tonight." The chatter died down instantly. Vanessa sat up a little straighter in her chair, like a cat catching the scent of a mouse. "We have just received a remarkably generous buyout offer for Montgomery Industries." Michael nearly choked on his wine. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "An investment firm called—" What was it? "Ah, yes. Hope Investments LLC. They want to acquire the company for a very considerable sum." The name floated above the expensive china like a silent, ticking bomb. "Hope Investments. My company. My offer." Vanessa looked genuinely confused. "But Daddy, I thought Montgomery Industries was perfectly stable?" Charles waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, the company is perfectly fine, but when someone comes along offering easy money, a smart man considers his options." Easy money. As if $19 million were just breadcrumbs he could brush off the table on a whim. "How much are they offering?" a man asked from the other end of the table. "A very respectable figure. More than enough for Catherine and me to retire in absolute comfort and step back so Vanessa and Michael can forge their own path." Catherine nodded regally. "It's high time the next generation took on some responsibility." Michael looked utterly lost. "But Dad, what happens to my job? To my career?" "Oh, sweetheart," Vanessa said, placing her manicured hand over his. "I'm sure the new owners will recognize your value." Michael had worked at Montgomery Industries for 8 years, grinding his way up from an administrative assistant to the director of development. Everything he had built was about to be handed over to total strangers. "Do we know anything about these new investors?" asked the accountant's wife. "Only that they have massive liquid capital and they wanted to close rapidly," Charles replied smoothly. "Apparently, it's a family office looking to aggressively expand their portfolio." Family office. Well, technically, he wasn't wrong. "And when will this transition happen?" Michael asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "It's already done." The silence in the dining room was absolute. "Excuse me?" Vanessa had dropped her perfect composure. "I signed the final papers this afternoon. Montgomery Industries is no longer ours." Michael went dead pale. "This afternoon? Without even consulting me?" "Son, sometimes real business requires split-second decisions." Vanessa stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "How could you make a decision like that without talking to us?" "Vanessa, calm yourself," Catherine ordered sharply. "The men know exactly what they are doing in business." But Vanessa was far from calm. Her eyes flashed with a raw panic I had never seen before. "No, this affects our future, the future of my children, her children, the future grandchildren she had used as leverage just yesterday morning." Charles stood up, his patriarchal authority on full display. "Vanessa, do not raise your voice to me in my own house. It's not going to be your house for much longer. If you sold the company, where is the cash going to come from to maintain all of this?" The comment dropped like an anvil. Several guests exchanged wide-eyed, intensely uncomfortable looks. "The company has never been our only source of income," Catherine said, though her voice was noticeably weak. "Yes, it has." Vanessa was entirely losing her grip. "Everything depends on the corporation. Daddy's executive bonuses, Michael's salary, the government contract kickbacks." Michael shot up and grabbed his wife's arm. "Vanessa, please, we can discuss this in private." But Vanessa ripped her arm away and rounded on me, her eyes practically burning holes through my navy suit. "And you, just sitting there, acting like nothing is happening. Don't you realize this affects all of us?" Every single eye at the table snapped to me. The poor, clueless widow who had been dragged into a high-stakes corporate drama she couldn't possibly comprehend. I picked up my linen napkin, delicately dabbed the corners of my mouth, and smiled. "You're absolutely right, Vanessa. This affects all of us." Breakfast at the Montgomery household must have been incredibly tense the next morning. I, on the other hand, thoroughly enjoyed mine from my own kitchen, reading the morning paper and sipping coffee from the mug Robert had bought me for our first anniversary. My cell phone had been ringing non-stop since 6 a.m. First Michael, then Vanessa, then Charles. They all wanted to clarify the misunderstandings from the night before, and to ensure I hadn't taken the family tension to heart. I hadn't answered a single call. At 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I saw Vanessa's white BMW idling in my driveway. She had come alone, which was interesting. She had also arrived wearing zero makeup, which was utterly unprecedented. "Good morning, Vanessa," I said, opening the door with my warmest, most maternal smile. "Mama Mary, we need to talk." "Of course, sweetheart. Coffee?" "No, thank you. This is serious." She marched into my living room and sat down like a general mapping out a battlefield. Her usual polished elegance had been completely erased by barely contained panic. "Last night was a total disaster," she began. "My father made a highly impulsive decision that could literally ruin this entire family." "Business can be so unpredictable," I replied, feigning sympathetic ignorance. "This isn't just business. This is our entire lives. The house, the cars, the trips, everything depends on the revenue from the company." An interesting confession. The Montgomery family was far more leveraged in debt than their society pages implied. "I'm sure your father will find a way to adapt." Vanessa looked at me as if I had just said the most incredibly stupid thing she had ever heard. "Mama, Mary, you don't understand. Without the company, there is no money. Without the money, there is no—" She stopped abruptly, seemingly realizing exactly what she was about to admit. "There is no what, Vanessa?" "There is no lifestyle. There is no social standing. There is nothing." For the first time since the day I met her, Vanessa was being entirely honest, and that honesty had stripped her of all her armor. "What do you need from me, sweetheart?" Michael said. "He said you have a nest egg, some savings. We thought maybe you could help us out, temporarily." And there was the true purpose of the Saturday morning visit. Help them out. Like, lend us some money. Just until we can get the company back, or Michael can find a new executive position, or— Her voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what we're going to do." The young woman who, just 48 hours ago, had treated me like a pathetic charity case was now sitting on my sofa, begging for a loan. "How much would you need?" "Not a lot. Just enough to cover the basic overhead, the mortgage on the house, the leases on the cars, things like that. Basic overhead that likely amounted to more than my highest annual salary as a school teacher." "Vanessa, let me ask you a question. When you screamed at me last night that I didn't understand the situation, what did you mean by that exactly?" She stiffened immediately. I'm sorry. And when you told me to keep my mouth shut about looking for a job because I didn't understand what was going on, what was it you thought I didn't understand?" Vanessa shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Well, you just aren't involved in the corporate world. I thought maybe the dinner conversations would confuse you." "I see. You thought I was too stupid to follow a conversation about business." "No, I didn't say that. Not in those exact words." The silence stretched between us like a crack forming in thick ice. "Mama Mary," Vanessa finally said, her voice trembling. "I know I can sound a little blunt sometimes, but I really do appreciate you. We all do." "Since when? How?" "Since exactly when have you appreciated me?" I asked quietly. "Because 2 days ago, I was a pathetic burden who was never going to find a job. Last night, I was an embarrassment who needed to be hidden in the corner so I wouldn't offend the important guests. But today, when you need cash, suddenly I am deeply appreciated." Vanessa turned an ashen shade of pale. I never wanted to give you that impression." "What impression, exactly, were you trying to give when you announced to a room full of strangers that I didn't have many social options?" "It was a joke. Just a joke. Like when my dad said Michael coming from a hardworking family was quaint." She had no defense left. "Look, Vanessa," I continued, keeping my voice perfectly level, "I understand the family's financial situation is shifting dramatically, but I need you to understand something too." "What?" "That after 3 straight years of being treated like the embarrassing poor relative who should be grateful for scraps of family time, I have absolutely zero interest in becoming your emergency bank." Vanessa stood up so fast she almost tripped. "So, you aren't going to help us?" "I didn't say that." She slowly sat back down, a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes. "I said I have no interest in being the family bank. But perhaps we can come to another type of arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" I smiled. The exact same artificially sweet smile she had used on me for 3 years. "Give me a few days to think about it. I'll call you." The moment she drove away, I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. "Mr. Sterling, when does Montgomery Industries plan to officially announce the change in ownership?" "That is entirely at your discretion, Mrs. Davis. We can execute the announcement whenever you like. Perfect. And regarding the current executive personnel, how quickly can I make sweeping changes? Immediately, if necessary. I hung up the phone and poured myself another cup of coffee. On the kitchen counter, right next to the morning paper, sat the framed photo of Robert that I had placed there the day after his funeral. In it, he was smiling widely, carrying a 5-year-old Michael on his shoulders in the backyard. "Robert," I whispered to the photograph, "I think I am finally going to understand what it means to be in complete control of my own life." On Sunday morning, while I was out back pruning the roses Robert had planted decades ago, I saw Michael walking up my driveway. He came alone, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, wearing the exact same expression he used to wear as a little boy when he knew he was in serious trouble. "Morning, sweetheart," I called out, not putting down my pruning shears. "Mom, we need to talk." "Of course. Do you want some coffee?" We sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where he had eaten breakfast every morning of his childhood. Michael looked much older than his 42 years. Dark circles hung under his eyes, betraying nights of lost sleep. "Vanessa told me about your conversation yesterday." "Ah, yes. What exactly did she tell you?" That you aren't willing to help us out financially. An interesting omission of literally everything else we had discussed. "Is that all she told you?" Michael couldn't look me in the eye. "She also said that maybe you're upset about some comments that were made." "Some comments. As if they were casual observations about the weather. And what is your opinion on those comments, Michael?" "Mom, you know Vanessa. Sometimes she speaks without thinking, but she has a good heart." "And Charles? Does he also speak without thinking?" Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "The Montgomerys are just different. They come from a completely different world. Sometimes they don't realize how they sound." "And what world do you come from, Michael?" "What do you mean?" "When your wife mocked me at a dinner party, saying I would probably never find a job, what world was your laughter coming from?" Michael flushed deep red. "I didn't laugh." "You smiled." As if she had just said the most charming thing in the world. "Mom, please. We are going through a massive crisis right now." "I understand. Life gets very difficult when you suddenly have to function without the family corporation's credit cards. How do you know about the fact that your entire family was financially dependent on Montgomery Industries because they practically screamed it across the dining room table on Friday night?" Michael let out a long, heavy sigh. "Yes, it's true. Dad was helping us out with some major expenses. The mortgage on the house is huge, the car leases, the country club memberships, the lifestyle Vanessa is accustomed to. My salary just didn't cut it. Your salary covered the basics, but Vanessa comes from a family with certain standards." "I understand." "So, when they were saying that I was the one who needed financial help..." "Mom, it wasn't personal." "Michael, I want you to explain something to me." "What?" "At what exact moment did you decide that your mother was an embarrassment?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He recoiled in his chair. "I have never thought that." "Then explain to me why. For the past 3 years, every single family invitation has come with strict instructions on how I should behave so I don't embarrass you." "That's not true." "Really? You didn't tell me on Friday night to blend in quietly so I wouldn't bother the important guests?" Michael stared at the table, speechless. "Hasn't Vanessa repeatedly told me it's best if I don't mention my job hunt because it gives the wrong impression?" More heavy silence. "Haven't we had this conversation before? How my house is too big for me, my lifestyle too expensive, my decisions too impulsive." "Mom, we just wanted to help you." "Help who, Michael? Me? Or yourselves?" My son finally lifted his head and looked me in the eyes. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. When did you stop seeing me as your mother and start seeing me as a burden?" Tears immediately welled up in his eyes. "I never wanted you to feel that way, but that is exactly how you made me feel. Look at me, Michael. I am 65 years old. I raised a son entirely on my own after your father walked out on us when you were 8. I let the weight of the history settle in the room. I worked 2 jobs to keep you in good schools. I paid your way through your undergraduate degree. I nursed Robert through his final years. And after all of that, I somehow became the pathetic widow who needed her daughter-in-law's charity just to be included in Sunday dinners. Mom, I am not finished. For 3 years, I have smiled while being treated like an object of pity, I have pretended that their cruel jokes didn't hurt. I have pretended not to notice when they introduced me as Vanessa's mother-in-law instead of Mary Davis, a retired educator with 30 years of experience. I didn't know you felt like this. No, you didn't want to know. Because it was much easier to have a mother who kept quiet and didn't cause problems for your wife. Michael broke down, crying openly at the kitchen table. It was the first time I had seen him cry since Robert's funeral. I don't know how to fix this, he choked out. Well, there is something you need to know about your family's current situation. What? I stood up, walked over to the kitchen drawer, and pulled out the thick manila folder containing the acquisition documents. I dropped it squarely on the table in front of him. What is this? He asked, wiping his eyes. Read it. Michael opened the folder. His confusion grew with every page he turned. I don't understand. What is Hope Investments LLC? It's my company, Michael. I bought Montgomery Industries. Michael stared at the legal documents as if they were written in ancient Greek. His hands began to shake violently when he reached the final page and saw my signature next to the corporate seal. This can't be real. It is entirely real. But, Mom, where did you get this kind of money? I told him everything. About Aunt Margaret's massive inheritance, about the weeks of secret legal investigations, about the private calls to Arthur Sterling while his family was busy treating me like a charity case. Aunt Margaret left you $42 million, he whispered, as if the words themselves were impossible. 42. Exactly. And you used $19 million to buy the Montgomery's Corporation. I used $19 million to buy the company where you work, Michael. The sheer reality of the situation finally slammed into his face. Every drop of color drained from his cheeks. You're my new boss. I am the sole proprietor of the corporation that employs my son as director of development. Yes. Michael stood up abruptly and started pacing circles around my small kitchen. Why? Why would you do this? Because I could. And because it was high time someone in this family had some actual decision-making power. But this is insane! What are you going to do with a corporate firm? What do you know about running a business? His reaction was exactly what I had anticipated. To him, I was still just his incompetent mother who needed guidance to make big decisions. Michael, I ran a mathematics department for 15 years. I managed massive district budgets, handled 50 staff members, and hit state performance metrics. Do you really think I am too stupid to understand how a balance sheet works? No, that's not it, Mom. But this is different. This is revenge. Revenge against who? Against us? Against the family? The family that has systematically humiliated me for 3 years? Okay, I'm sorry, we're all sorry. But this? Buying the company where I work just to what? To fire me? To ruin my life? The raw panic in his voice was genuine, but it was also incredibly revealing. He wasn't worried that he had broken his mother's heart. He was terrified of the consequences for himself. Michael. What on earth makes you think I bought that company to ruin your life? Why else would you do it? Can you honestly not think of a single other reason? He stopped pacing in the middle of the kitchen, looking utterly lost. Maybe, I said softly, I bought it to save you. What? Montgomery Industries was bankrupt, Michael. They were going to shutter the doors in 4 months. Charles sold the company to me because the banks cut off his credit and he had 0 options left. Your job was already gone. Michael collapsed back into his chair. Are you sure? Absolutely positive. The government contracts are under federal investigation for kickbacks. The commercial loans have defaulted. The family empire you thought was your future was days away from vanishing into thin air. And by buying it, I saved it. I saved the company. I saved your job. I saved the future you thought you had just lost. Michael stared at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a little boy looking up at me. Absolute awe. Mom, did you really do all of this? I did. And my job is safe? Your job is more than safe. But there are conditions. His face darkened instantly. What kind of conditions? First, no more financial secrets. I want full, unredacted reports on every operation within that company. The finances, the liabilities, everything. Okay, done. Second, there are going to be personnel changes. Some employees are going to be restructured immediately. Like who? We will discuss that tomorrow in the office. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I am holding a mandatory meeting with the entire executive staff to officially announce the change in ownership." Michael went pale all over again. "Charles and Catherine are going to be there. They no longer work for the company. But Vanessa will be there." "Vanessa? Why would Vanessa be at an executive staff meeting?" "Because, according to the corporate payroll records, Vanessa Montgomery has been pulling a salary from the firm for 2 years as a public relations consultant." "What?" $15,000 a month, for a job that, as far as my auditors can tell, consists entirely of eating lunch with other executives' wives and attending charity galas. Michael looked like he was going to be sick. I didn't know that." "There are a lot of things you didn't know, Michael. But tomorrow morning, we are putting everything on the table." I stood up and started brewing a fresh pot of coffee, acting as if we had just wrapped up a casual chat about the weather. "Mom," Michael said, after a very long silence, "do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. I turned to look at him, and for a fleeting second, I saw the 8-year-old boy who had cried in my arms when his father left. I saw the teenager who used to help me pull weeds in the garden on weekends. I saw the young man who had wept with joy when I handed him his college diploma. "Michael, you are my son. It is biologically impossible for me to hate you." I paused. "But I am deeply disappointed in the way you have allowed them to treat me. And I am even more disappointed in the way you started treating me. Can I fix it? I don't know. But tomorrow, we are going to start trying." My cell phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID flashed. "Vanessa." "I'm not going to answer that," I said, "but I'm willing to bet she has some very urgent questions about tomorrow's meeting." "How does she know about tomorrow's meeting?" "Because she just received an official email from Human Resources, summoning her to a mandatory restructuring review with the new board of directors." Michael looked at me with something that might actually have been pride. "Mom, I think I completely underestimated who you are." "Yes," I replied, pouring the coffee into the mugs Robert had picked out for us so many years ago. "I think you did." The executive boardroom at Montgomery Industries featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the downtown Dallas skyline. At 8:30 a.m., the morning sun poured through the glass, casting sharp beams of light across the polished mahogany table where I sat for the very first time as the official owner. Arthur Sterling sat to my right, flanked by a mountain of legal documents. My CPA sat to my left, his tablet loaded with updated financial audits. Across from me, 6 heavy leather chairs waited for the executives whose lives were about to permanently change. Michael arrived first, punctual as always. He was wearing his best-tailored suit and an expression of tightly controlled anxiety. He greeted me formally. "Good morning, Mrs. Davis." It was the first time in years he had used my last name with respect. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes late, which was incredibly uncharacteristic for a woman so utterly obsessed with appearances. Her flawless makeup couldn't entirely mask the dark circles under her eyes, and her tight smile looked like it was physically hurting her face. "Good morning, Mama Mary," she said, her voice strained. "Michael told me you wanted to see me about some corporate paperwork. Take a seat, Vanessa. We will begin momentarily." The rest of the executive team filed in, wearing expressions of barely concealed utter confusion. The chief financial officer, the VP of operations, the director of human resources, and the head of sales. Every single one of them had worked under Charles Montgomery for years, and clearly none of them had the slightest idea why an unknown, 65-year-old woman was presiding at the head of their boardroom table. At 9 a.m. sharp, I stood up. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Davis, and as of Friday afternoon, I am the sole owner and acting CEO of Montgomery Industries." The silence in the room was absolute. Several executives immediately looked at Michael, as if hoping he would explain the punchline of the joke. "I know this is highly unexpected," I continued smoothly. "Charles Montgomery made the decision to liquidate his shares without consulting his executive team. My firm, Hope Investments LLC, made a cash offer that was accepted immediately." Vanessa had lost all the blood in her face. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table. You bought the company?" "Yes, Vanessa. I bought the company." "But how? Where did you get that kind of money?" "That information is strictly confidential and irrelevant to today's agenda. What matters is that the corporation is now operating under new ownership, and there will be several immediate structural changes." Mr. Sterling stood up and slid a thick packet of paper to every person at the table. These are your new employment contracts, I explained. The vast majority of you will retain your current titles, accompanied by improved compensation packages and benefits. As you all likely know, Montgomery Industries has been operating on a highly unsustainable financial model that would have resulted in federal bankruptcy within 4 months. The VP of Operations cautiously raised his hand. Does this mean our jobs are safe, ma'am? Your jobs are vastly safer today than they have been at any point in the last 2 years, I confirmed. However, there are a few specific positions that will be permanently eliminated. Vanessa went rigid in her leather chair, like an animal sensing a predator in the tall grass. Vanessa Montgomery, I said, my voice ringing clear across the silent room. According to HR payroll records, you have been drawing a salary of $15,000 a month for the last 2 years as a public relations consultant. Yes, I manage the firm's relationships with high-net-worth clients, social events, charity galas. Can you provide any documentation of your labor? Activity reports? Performance metrics? Measurable return on investment? Vanessa whipped her head toward Michael, silently begging for a lifeline. But Michael kept his eyes locked firmly on the legal documents in front of him. My work is much more intuitive than that. It's about personal networking. You know how these things work. I understand. Unfortunately, this corporation no longer has the budgetary bandwidth to support intuitive networking positions. Your contract as a consultant is terminated, effective immediately. You can't do that. I absolutely can. I am the sole owner of the company. Vanessa shoved her chair back so hard it slammed into the credenza behind her. This is completely ridiculous. Michael, say something. Michael finally looked up. His voice was remarkably calm, yet unyielding. Vanessa, Mrs. Davis has the absolute legal right to restructure the company's payroll however she sees fit. The raw betrayal in Vanessa's eyes was almost radioactive. Mrs. Davis is your mother, and she is doing this on purpose. She is also my new boss. Vanessa turned her fury entirely on me, dropping the sweet Mama Mary facade once and for all. This is about the dinner party, isn't it? You're going to ruin my entire life over a few little jokes? Vanessa, this has absolutely nothing to do with jokes. This is strictly business. Liar, this is revenge. Revenge for what, exactly? For everything. Because Michael chose me. Because he doesn't need you anymore. The vicious comment hung in the boardroom air like poisonous gas. The other executives stared at their legal pads, visibly squirming in their seats. Vanessa, I said, with a quiet, icy calm that surprised even me, Michael did not choose me. I raised him. I have loved that man unconditionally for 42 years, not because he chose me, but because he is my son. Then why are you doing this? She screamed. Because a corporation staring down bankruptcy cannot afford to pay $15,000 a month to an employee whose only actual job is spending money she didn't earn. Vanessa grabbed her designer purse and stormed toward the glass doors. She stopped with her hand on the handle and glared at Michael one last time. Are you really going to sit there and let your mother humiliate me like this? After everything we've built together? Michael looked her dead in the eye for the first time all morning. Vanessa, my mother isn't humiliating you. She is treating you exactly the way she would treat any corporate employee who brings zero value to the company. I cannot believe you are taking her side. I'm not on anyone's side. I'm on the side of honesty. Vanessa threw open the heavy glass doors and stormed out, letting them slam shut with a boom that echoed all the way down the executive hallway. Right, I said, turning back to the stunned executives. Now that is handled, let's discuss the actual future of Montgomery Industries. The restructuring meeting lasted 2 full hours. By the time we adjourned, I had completely overhauled the financial division, approved merit-based raises for crucial operations staff, and authorized new vendor contracts that practically guaranteed the firm's stability for the next 5 years. When the boardroom finally emptied out, leaving only Michael and me sitting at the massive mahogany table, the silence felt incredibly heavy. Mom, Michael finally said, loosening his silk tie, how do you feel? It was a fascinating question. How did I feel? After dethroning the arrogant family that had humiliated me, rescuing a massive corporation from the brink of ruin, and entirely rewriting the power dynamics of my own family, I feel like Mary Hope Davis, I replied. For the first time in 3 years, I feel exactly like myself. And us? Are you and I going to be okay? I looked at him across the polished table, the exact table where I had just definitively proven that a 5-year-old retired school teacher could execute business strategies better than the men who had run the corporation for decades. Michael, that depends entirely on you. What do you mean? I mean, you can choose to keep seeing me as your problematic, aging mother who needs to be hidden away and managed. Or you can start seeing me as Mary Davis, CEO, businesswoman, and your professional equal. Someone whose opinions and decisions actually command respect. Michael smiled. A real, genuine smile. I think I strongly prefer the second option. Good, because starting tomorrow, we have a lot of real work to do. We walked out of Montgomery Industries, my company, side by side. In the parking garage, Michael stopped next to my reliable little Honda Accord. Mom? Can I ask you one more thing? Of course. What are you going to do about Vanessa? What do you mean? She's still my wife. Despite everything. Michael, whatever happens between you and Vanessa is entirely your business. I just took over a corporation. I have no interest in taking over your marriage. But, do you forgive her? I thought about the question as I looked out at the Dallas skyline stretching out before us. Somewhere out in that city, Vanessa was undoubtedly crying to her parents, frantically planning her next move, desperately trying to figure out a way to claw back the control she had just lost. Michael, forgiveness is something you offer when a person actually understands what they did wrong and is genuinely repentant. Vanessa isn't repentant. She's just furious because she lost her power over me. So you don't forgive her? I understand her. I understand that she viewed me as a threat to her social hierarchy, and she tried to neutralize that threat by keeping me subordinate. It was a very smart social strategy, and it worked beautifully for 3 years. I opened my car door, but she severely underestimated who she was playing against. Michael let out a loud, booming laugh, a sound of pure joy I hadn't heard from him in years. Mom, I think we all severely underestimated you. Yes, I replied, sliding into the driver's seat. I think you did. That evening, as I sat eating dinner at the kitchen table, where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals, my cell phone rang. Charles Montgomery. Mary. His voice was incredibly tight, strained with suppressed rage. We need to talk. Good evening, Charles. What can I do for you? You know exactly why I'm calling. Vanessa came over crying. She told us everything. Everything? What is everything, exactly? That I bought the company, that I eliminated her position, or that I'm supposedly plotting a grand revenge against your family? Mary, I'm warning you. Charles, I am not taking revenge on anyone. I purchased a failing corporation that was 4 months away from bankruptcy, and I restructured the payroll to make it profitable. It's standard procedure in the corporate world. You bought our company. I bought a company you secretly put up for sale because you lacked the competence to manage your own debt. And firing Vanessa? That was uncalled for. Vanessa brought absolutely zero measurable value to the daily operations. Terminating her contract was a purely financial decision. The silence on the other end of the line was incredibly long. When Charles finally spoke again, his booming patriarchal voice had been replaced by something much softer, something akin to defeat. Mary, he said quietly. I know. Perhaps we didn't always treat you with the respect you deserved. Perhaps. Fine. I admit we made some errors in judgment, but doing all of this is entirely disproportionate. Disproportionate would be allowing a company with hundreds of employees to go bankrupt just to protect your fragile ego, I replied coldly. Disproportionate would be letting my son lose his entire career because you didn't know how to balance a ledger. So you did this all for Michael? I did this for me, Charles. For the very first time in years, I did something for me. And what happens to our families now? The family members who respect me will always have a place at my table, I said plainly. The family members who treat me like a burden are free to make their own arrangements. I hung up the phone and went back to my dinner. Outside the window, Robert's rose bushes swayed gently under the patio lights I had installed after his funeral. Inside, his framed photograph smiled warmly from the counter where we had shared so many of our wildest dreams. Robert, I whispered to the empty room, I think I finally learned the lesson you spent all those years trying to teach me. True love doesn't require you to make yourself small just to make other people feel big. The very next morning, Montgomery Industries opened its doors under entirely new administration. The employees moved through the halls with a renewed, buzzing energy, knowing their jobs were safe and the corporation finally had a stable future. Michael walked into the executive suite right on time, stepping into his new role as Vice President of Development, ready to work alongside his mother as a professional equal for the very first time. Vanessa didn't call. Charles and Catherine didn't call, either. And I, Mary Hope Davis, a 5-year-old retired school teacher, turned corporate CEO, sat down behind the heavy desk in my new corner office, overlooking the city. I looked out at the skyline, knowing with absolute certainty that I had accomplished something very few women of my generation ever get to do. I had taken total, unapologetic control of my own life, not with vengeance, but with power, not with cruelty, but with justice, and absolutely, unequivocally, without asking for anyone's permission. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't laugh just to please the people around me. I laughed because, finally, I was genuinely happy.